Well, good morning, Grace, once again. This morning we have a very special service planned. Typically, we would have a pastor stand up and open God's Word and bring a message. But we have a guest panel this morning that I'm going to ask to come to the stage right now. Could we just welcome them? Welcome, distinguished guests. We are thrilled that you're here. And these friends are going to help us answer many of our Q&A questions that you've been turning in this week. For those of you who are visiting, we are in a series entitled Bank on It, and talking about God's promises for financial well-being. And what does God's Word have to say about stewarding the resources He's entrusted to us? And so this morning, we're going to be answering those questions. And so a couple caveats here before we get to introductions. Number one, all of these questions are your questions. There aren't any plants. There aren't any that the church was like, oh, we totally need to address this again. No, we took care of that in the sermons that came the previous 4 weeks. Now these are really just answering questions that were turned in. What I'll say as well is some of those questions were doubled, and so we're not going to be able to hit all of them, but we combined some of those as well. So we got so many questions that we would probably be here till about 4 p.m. if we answered all of them thoroughly. So we're going to we've picked quite a few good ones that are very practical in helping us really put feet to the good promises and good truths that we learn from God's Word. So let's start with introductions here today, and I'm going to go from my left, your right, and moving over here. So can you share your name, maybe just briefly how long you've been coming to church here at Grace, and what relationship do you have with finances? Well, either if it's I have money and need to do something with money, or is that something you do professionally as well? So if you could just give a brief intro.
Dave Hatton. I've been coming to Grace for 9 years, served on the production team with worship for 7, and deacon and treasurer for about 4 years now, 5 years. And in my day-to-day life, I'm a certified financial planner since 2002, in the business for 25 years.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for coming, because Dave being on this panel means that we all get free advice, which he normally gets paid for. So thank you for just generously giving of your time today. And next we have?
I am Melissa Richards. I've been here 4 years, I think.
Yeah.
I have my own cleaning service, I guess, is
Yep.
how I used to be a bookkeeper too, so I
Yes.
guess that qualifies.
Yep.
So
You also kept church books as well,
I
too.
did.
Yes,
I did.
Absolutely. So she sees the ins and outs of our big budget as well as a personal work budget. And then do you also do financing or the budgeting for your family as well? Are you the main one? Sure. All right. There you go. And to my right here, your left.
I'm Rachel Kreider, and I've worked in private accounting for a couple years, and now I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I do our finances, or I prepare the material for us to work through together.
Awesome. It's great.
Oh, and I've been coming here for about 10 years.
Awesome.
All right, Andrew Von Gillard. So I've been coming here since, 2006?
Since the beginning. You're part of the core group, yeah.
Yeah. So as far as finance, economics degree, right now I've been a programmer, professionally, but right now I'm connected to an accounting firm, so I do a lot of programming for CFOs and businesses on their financial reporting and stuff like that. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Andrew serves as an elder here at Grace, and in the early days especially, Andrew used to do a lot of financial counseling for folks, and it really helped many families out at our church, just dealing with basics of budgeting and how to get in line with God's principles for their good. And so we're going to jump right in with questions, everybody, and just share on those so we can kind of just really deal with these very specific issues. And so the first question that we have today is kind of a two-part question, but it's about the tithe. It's about, this question is, what is a tithe? And where does it say to pay 10%? And those were the questions that came in. Now, I will say, this topic of tithing was the most popular question. In fact, probably a third of our questions that came in revolved around this. And so specifically, I'm going to give just the definition of what a tithe is, and then give you some Bible verses. So if you want to write those down in your notes, you can go back and check those later. And then I'm just going to throw it open for our panel here to kind of talk about tithing. And you've got some thoughts on these things too. So first, what is a tithe? Literally, the word means tenth. And it's found in the Scriptures. In the Old Testament, it was prescribed in the Mosaic Law. We find that in Deuteronomy 12, Deuteronomy 14, and chapter 26. But it wasn't just in the law as well. Later on, the prophets called the people back to covenant faithfulness in Malachi chapter 3 and said, man, bring the whole tithe into the house and see if God will not rain down his blessing upon you. And then we also see it, though, predating the Old Testament law in Abraham's act in Genesis 14, when Abraham gave a tithe of the spoils, or a tithe of the increase to his house, to Melchizedek, the priest before God. But we don't just see it in the Old Testament. In fact, the New Testament not only affirms it, but teaches it as well. We see it in Hebrews chapter 7, referring to that passage in Genesis where Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. It speaks about that again in Hebrews chapter 7, and speaking of the gift and the tithes that he gave to the Lord. And ultimately, Melchizedek is either a type of Christ, or it may have been a theophany of Christ. Scholars differ. But the idea is Jesus is greater than Melchizedek. And so the principle there speaks to, if we gave tithes in the Old Testament to Melchizedek, why would we not give tithes to our greater king? That's the thinking. But even more so in the New Testament, and more specifically, Jesus addressed it. And he addressed it very clearly in Luke chapter 11, verse 42. And in that passage, he was speaking to the Pharisees, and he affirmed the tithe when he said this. Woe to you, Pharisees. Obviously, they're not in a good place for this one, but he says, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. And so for them, they were tithing even the very smallest things that they had received and were increased in their homes. Even their herbs and their mint, rue, and herb, as it says. But they were missing the more important things of the law. But Jesus said this about the tithe. He said, these you ought to have done without neglecting the others. And so again, Jesus affirms the tithe is appropriate. The tithe is right. So that's just an overview. There's many other passages that could speak to it. But let's just talk to our panel about that. What do you guys think in terms of dealing with the tithe? And what's that look like for you? How have you dealt with that? Andrew?
I mean, I like to think of this in two different ways, right? One is, like, as Mike has already kind of bookended, as far as, theology-wise. So I think the idea, especially in Genesis, since that's where everything's coming from as far as driving the theology, the idea is that God has blessed these people. So Abraham, he had been blessed not only financially, but he had just been delivered in battle. He had won against the other kings. So he's like, God has blessed me, thus I must go and bless the priest who works for God, right? And then same thing in Genesis 28 with Jacob. He's like, I just had this dream and promise from God that this is going to be my inheritance. He's like, I need to give a tenth. That's his response. So the idea is that God has blessed you, so your response of worship is to have the tithe. So it becomes like this heart issue, which I think other people might talk about. I think personally, I just got to tell you guys, in my family, and I know this isn't always the case, so I'll just put that out there. But the idea is that we didn't have financial freedom until we tithed. And that was and it was like a faith thing. It was a very write the check, God please, And you know what though? God came through. And ever since that month of our marriage, I mean, this was the second year of our marriage. We've been married 23 years.
Praise God, that's awesome.
We've been free there. Now, like I said, I know that's not always normal, but for me, that has been a very big part. So for me, I'm like, I'm not going back. That's just a big piece for me.
Yeah. Dave?
One of the things I would just say with this question is that words mean things. And to the author of the question, I don't mean to castigate, because I do the same thing. I use the word pay oftentimes. But I think the word that we need to look at here is not so much pay, but give our tithe. And the basic premise of this, and really everything else that we're going to talk about here today, is the fact that God owns it all. When we talk about ownership, or when we own a house, or we have money, we have nothing. And everything that we have is His. And there's a literary technique used in the Bible. If something's repeated twice or three times, it adds more importance. And I don't know any place in there where it actually says it three times that God owns everything in a row or in one verse. But if you look at First Chronicles 29, 11, and 12, all the world is mine, or yours. In Exodus 19:5, all the world is mine. In Psalm 50:15, you own everything. Yeah. And so he repeats this, and these are only three examples of where God has total ownership.
That's great. Ladies, would you have anything to add?
Well, I totally agree with that. And once I kind of wrapped my mind around that it's not mine. And it was the hardest thing for me to let go of. And in the same situation where when we finally wrapped our head around that, He always provided. There might have been $1 left in the bank account, but we had everything. All the bills were paid, everything. Yeah. You know, it was once we trusted Him with that.
Yeah.
He did provide. He always did. It was my lack of faith. It wasn't that He wasn't going to provide, but I needed to trust Him and know that it's not mine, it's His. And if He tells me to sell it, then you sell it. If He tells me to stay, then I stay.
What a great spirit. Thank you for saying that. Rachel, anything to add? Or we've got another question about this. We can move on. Okay. So here's another question, and it's kind of regarding the tithes, specifically tithes and offerings. If I donate to a missionary, Christian charity, or the church benevolence fund, or maybe you can add in whatever. I think they had an et cetera in there. Is that part of my tithe or in addition to it? What do we think, panel?
I think the other giving is over and above. There's a shoulda, coulda, woulda, and
speak more about that, sir.
What you should give, what you could give, or would give, and what you could give. 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18 basically says that our pastors deserve to get paid for what they do. If you do the work, you deserve to get paid. And this is where we're fed. This is where we get our spiritual feeding every week. And I'll speak as treasurer here for a moment. You know, we have a budget, and that budget pays for our staff, from the senior pastor to all the way down to the assistants and the different pastors that we have. But it also goes to pay for a lot of the ministries that we support, and to keep the lights on here for us. So that costs. And when you look at that, the rest of it is things that we should be doing, and we should be feeding people in Round Lake, and helping people out through Love Inc. and some of the other ministries that we work with. So I would say that it starts here, and then anything else is over and above.
Okay. Anybody else want to add?
I was just going to ask, or say that I think the issue here sometimes is investment in your church, right? And not to like beat people with this, but the idea is that the local church is supposed to be the one active in the community and in the world and all those things. And we strive to do that here. But again, those are things where you're like, sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to hold back part of the tithe because the church isn't doing everything I want, obviously heart issue. Or it'll say they're not doing everything I think they should be doing as far as God. You know, maybe it's not a critical spirit. Either of those need to come to local church and say, hey guys, like, are we doing this? Are we working together? And I think it's an investment of relationship with your local church. And that is, I think that's a hang-up sometimes when we think of, like you think of the church as an investment or something, and obviously that's wrong too. But I do think it's a side where you would want to team with the local church and say, hey, you know, I have a burden, let's say, to minister in Africa. You know what? That's something the local church would love to be invested into as well. And then we work together. So that's just something to bring up. That's
great. Okay, let's do this one. This is a fun question because it's kind of a multiple choice option. How would you prioritize the following? Number one, church giving. Number two, parental support. And I think the spirit of this question was caring for aging parents, not necessarily parents caring for their children's futures or that kind of stuff. So caring for aging parents there. Church giving, parental support. Number 3, retirement. And number 4, saving for a down payment. Let's start with the ladies on this one. How would you, and the 4 options are up on the screen too if you got to remember them, but how would you put them, and maybe a little bit of why? Rachel, we haven't heard from you yet. You've got great wisdom.
So for us, the tithing, the giving, church giving is a non-negotiable. That's right off the top before we start divvying out the rest of the money. Obviously taxes, tithe, and then saving, and then the rest is depending on our season of life. So for us, a lot, it's because of the season we're in. What are we preparing for? So I think it just depends.
Sure. So if you were to just go, I'd do church giving first, and then what would come number 2 for you? I
think there's a missing category.
Oh, interesting. Choose
So,
your own adventure. I always love those books, right?
So church giving, and then for us would be the retirement and the savings. I feel like there's the general saving funds. I guess this might go more towards the budgeting questions.
Sure.
But saving for specific categories. So.
Okay.
We're not in the stage of parental support, obviously. So the down payment would be one of those funds that I would consider as one of those categories, yes.
Okay, great. Melissa, how about you? How would you have prioritized those?
Well, I agree that, church giving is non-negotiable. It's right off the top because none of it's mine anyway. And I would probably, I guess, we're not huge on the whole retirement thing. There's not really a lot of retirement in the Bible.
Okay.
As far as we plan to work as long as we possibly can. That doesn't mean we're not saving for the future.
Yep.
But as far as never stopping working at a certain age, that's not something Keith and I plan to do.
Okay. So that one's going to be pretty low.
That's going to
you.
be pretty low
Yep.
as far as we are. Parental support, I would say if once you're in that situation, that would probably be number 2, but I also agree that saving for a certain thing, you have to be able to know that there's money to pay when your car breaks down and,
Right.
house needs fixing and, all of those types of things. So, yeah, I think I agree a lot with Rachel.
Yeah, it's great. Guys, keep it quicker, though. Keep it quicker.
I think we're going to say the same thing.
Okay.
But, for me, it seems like I'm going to assume there's a down payment for a house, because I think that's when it becomes a kind of what do we do?
Yeah.
So the idea here is if you're not stable, how are you going to help your parents? Right? So I do think there's an idea. So for me, I actually changed the saving the down payment piece. Obviously, you got to help your parents, but you might help your parents by getting a house so they can come live with you. And obviously that brings it, if they're sick, if they're, you can't take care of them, then that's a different problem, obviously.
Okay.
So it is a little bit of a circumstance situation, but I think if you don't have a place to live yourself and you want to help someone else, sometimes you have to make yourself stable so you can help them. And again, it depends on the immediate circumstance of what's happening.
Okay.
And I would just add, I think it's in the right order. The first
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
The first 2 are biblical. I think that we are called as Christians to take care of our immediate family, and in fact, 1 Timothy 5:8 will tell you that. And looking at retirement, to Melissa's point, that's a human construct. It's 150 years old to push older workers out of the workforce. But saving in and of itself is a biblical concept. As far as the house, no one says that we have to own a home, and I know, Mike, you preached this the other day, or a couple weeks ago. It's better to own a home than it is to rent. I think would say that's true in most cases, but there are people who, your pie is only so big, and you can't necessarily make that bigger. And so if you're saving for that rainy day, for that time when we can't work, then I would say that rent and keep a roof over your head, and make sure that you have the emergency fund, that sort of thing. But if you're doing this in your, Rachel mentioned seasons. If you're in especially if you're in one of the later seasons, if you get a 30-year mortgage, you're still going to be paying that mortgage well into your 80s. That's a bad thing to be doing. And especially if you have if you have all the costs of a home, there's that time when the roof needs to be repaired. There's time when the heater breaks down. Those emergencies are going to pop up, and they're going to cost. So you're oftentimes much better off to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to call my landlord because the water heater just broke.
I love being on a panel that makes me look good, because you all are so smart. I'm glad you guys are up here. This is great. What a blessing to be with you guys and to hear your wisdom. Here's another question. What are some practical things you have done to set and stick with a budget?
There's all sorts of different resources out there. There's all sorts of things online, but it's really what works best for you to know exactly where your money is at any point of the month. So for us, we just use a spreadsheet, and it's a live spreadsheet. It's as soon as I buy something, I sit in the car before I leave the parking lot, I add it to the spreadsheet so we can know at all times exactly where we're at. And then with sticking with it is truly, for me, I've had to wrestle with what lies am I believing and surrendering that to God. So I think typically, there's a great sale at Jewel. I got to get there and I got to stock up on this. But am I going to believe that if I stick with my budget, that God's timing will be perfect when I need that item from the grocery store?
Wow.
And that I don't have to stockpile. So that's been something I've really learned with how to stick with it.
Okay, that's excellent. Excellent.
I would just
Andrew?
say one thing is just to simplify it. And so basically you have to do the budget that Rachel's talking about. So you have to do that, get everything down so you actually know what's going on. What's worked well in my family is what I tend to do is I'll put like 14 categories into one bucket and then say, okay, listen, if we save money in this, then you get an extra $20, $30, whatever you save to spend in that month. So it really we took like household items, food, all these things, put them into one part of the budget. So now we're not looking at 12 numbers, we're looking at one.
Yeah.
Right? And then you say, I don't care what store you go to, we got to hit that number, right? And then, like I said, if we save money in that bucket, then it's like, hey, you get an extra $20, $30, I don't care what you spend it on because we're in the budget. The problem is when you go over, and then all of a sudden, everyone's going to have a discussion. But
Yeah. Great.
I would just go back to that previous question real quick. What you saw there was actually the formation of a budget, and the budget is a cornerstone of any financial plan, and it's basically what you're prioritizing. And you have a limited amount of resources. You prioritize that money as to how it goes out. To Rachel's point, you can use Excel spreadsheet. I saw a woman come in one time, had little binders that she had written in for the last 20 years, and she had every penny that she spent. I don't think you need to go to that degree, but it needs to be a general spending plan for the money and what that priority is for that month. Could be a car, needs fixed, and it could be extra groceries or whatever. So,
the next question is kind of along these lines, and I'd like you guys to speak to it in a very practical, simple way. Kath and I are going to be teaching a course that helped us tremendously called Budgeting for Dummies, and it's basically, how do we make the budgeting as simple as possible? So with that in mind, how do you keep track of how much you spend and save? Also, how do you track your accounts and how they fluctuate over time? What are the simple ways? Andrew, you talked about it being simple. Melissa, I'm sure you've experienced so much of this with your business and then with the church. How do you make it simple to just track the stuff that's coming in and going out?
I don't know. Thanks, Mike. I don't know. I just do.
You can hit the pass button. You want to hit the pass button?
Yeah, I really do.
All right, we'll come back to you if you got it.
Yeah.
So,
We
anybody?
could talk about that. So I think It depends really on your personality. Do you like tech? Do you not like tech? All these things. For people who like tech, there's something called mint.com, if you ever heard of them. But you got to give them access to everything, so it's a whole other debatable thing. But once you give them access, they'll literally pull all of your digital stuff from your bank, your bills, your credit card, pull it all in, and then they'll literally tell you what you're spending it on, so it's pretty daunting.
Yeah.
Because they'll be like, hey, 50% of your budget's entertainment. You're like, So if you really, for me, I didn't trust the bank for a while because I'd be like, what if they pull 50 cents from me? And I want my 50 cents, you know what I mean? So I would track and actually double check the bank. So I had my account and then I had their stuff, and I'd be like, hey, where'd that go? I kind of trust the bank now, just so you know. But after all those years, I did that for 10 years. But
this side over here was like, I don't trust the bank.
That's
okay.
It's kind of funny. But so the idea for me is like I said, when you simplify it, you say don't have 10 credit cards, have one, and don't use a credit card if you don't pay it off. You know what I mean? So the idea is to say, bank account, for me in our marriage, we have the same bank account. So anything that comes out of the bank account, we usually know about it. We'll talk way before we've spent the money.
Yeah.
But the idea is we're not having 10 bank accounts to keep track of. And like I said, sometimes it's smart to diversify, I believe. But the whole point is what works for you. I like old school Excel and for my budget. And then we used to, when we first started budgeting, we were doing paper, we were doing Excel by bucket, all those types of things. Obviously that's very labor intensive, but if you're in that phase of life, you have to do that to get your habits down and then say, okay, when we go over, we always go over in food. Okay, so guess what? You don't need to track everything, just track food, because food's the one you're going over on.
Yeah, and that's really helpful. Any other quick tidbits on tracking? Okay, all right, moving right along. Here's another question. What are your views on using credit cards versus cash-only spending? In some sense, today, how could you not use a credit card, but maybe there's some nuances to it, when would you use a credit card or when would you not, or maybe I'm just foolish and I'm off. Maybe you should always use cash. Anybody?
I would say there's a difference between borrowing and indebtedness. And if you have the means to pay it off, then by all means use the credit card. I'm flying, my mother and I are to Alaska later on this month. I have an Alaskan Airlines credit card. My oldest daughter lives up there. So I'm going to take her up. They have a companion fare where the second person flies for less than $100. So makes sense. Even with a $50 annual fee on that, it makes sense for me to have that card, but we pay it off at the end of each month. So we're borrowing the money. We're not being indebted to the credit card company.
Okay, that's a good point. Anybody else?
So it really depends on each person. If I know that I can't trust myself, that if I'm at the store and I say, oh, I only have $20 to spend in this category this month left, but then when I'm walking out, oh, 10, 20 extra dollars, that's fine. That's not fine. So how much can you trust yourself? Do you need to stick with just cash? Then that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
To honor God, right? So we're wanting to glorify God with our money and be good stewards with what we've been given. And so,
yeah.
What's your personality like?
I found that when you use a credit card, it's harder to track. You need to put in more intentionality to be able to track. Am I sticking with the budget? Because it's just easy to kind of whip out the plastic and then it kind of goes into financial world, wherever that is.
It's easier to spend.
It is, right? But if you've got that kind of cash in hand, so to speak, for some things, like maybe credit card for fixed expenses or, some of those regular entertainment budget or some of those things, then you're that's easier to kind of lock down. But yeah, like you said, it's going to be different for each person.
We actually do a lot of the Dave Ramsey kind of stuff. So
Okay.
we actually will take out the cash and do the envelope system, but we will put it on a credit card and then deposit the cash to pay for it. So we know that it's there. It's just a system that works for us, so we know that the money is actually there.
Man, that's so good. Okay, here's another question. Man, these are so good questions. Thank you for bringing these in. So very helpful. Life insurance. Is that a wise investment or fearful foolishness? And if it is a wise investment, how do you learn about it? Anybody? life insurance. Yay, nay? Yeah.
Well, in the Dave Ramsey thing, that book that we read, he talked about life insurance, and the way that we looked at it, we didn't look at it as far as an investment at all. It was more of, if something happens to Keith, he's the breadwinner.
Sure.
How am I going to be able to pay the house off or pay the bills, or so we did a term, because the goal is to have enough money later on to where that's not an issue. So you do it for 20 years, and then that's really all you should need it for.
Yeah.
And by that 20-year mark, then you should have enough accumulated to be able to take care of yourself and your family or whatever.
Can you ever have too much insurance?
I mean, for your life situation.
What's that?
I think for your life situation, you can definitely have too much insurance. So I think you got to, devil's advocate, and the idea that, okay, if something happens, like in my household, I'm the primary breadwinner. So if something happens to me, I got to say, okay, what does my wife need now to survive without me? And not so much just the cash, but education, kids' college, paying off the house, like all those things. So that becomes like your driver of how much coverage do I need? Because there's always going to be an agent willing to sell you, $50 million worth of life insurance. So the idea there is to say, okay, what do I need for this time of life? And it does change over time. So I think you get into these combo plans. If you actually talk to someone who does this professionally, they'll start rotating you based on your age into different types of life coverage. And then it becomes an investment vehicle, which is when you end up in Dave's department of, where's the best place to put your money for the highest return. So.
Speaking of investment vehicles, what are the best ways to invest your money? Is it wise to invest into precious metals such as gold and silver? And what about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, stuff like that?
How long do I have? Crypto, stay away from it. I've told my daughters, if you're going to be, if there's a gold rush, don't be the miners. Most of them don't make enough to return home. Be the person that sells the pickaxe. And if you're familiar with blockchain technology, if you're going to invest in crypto, that's where I would go. But talk to your financial advisor. Not a self-serving plug.
Dave, after saying that, you may have multiple more customers.
Not a self-serving plug. Not a self-serving plug.
I know.
Gold and silver, sure. It depends. Are you looking at it to cover for the apocalypse, or so you have something to barter with? Or are you looking at it as a diversification in case the market comes? Gold in the market typically acts inversely, but so if you're using it as a hedge against a down market, then yeah, I'd say it's an important thing to do.
Okay, all right. How about this one? Is investing in the stock market gambling, or are there ways to responsibly invest in the stock market? All you stock market investors up here, you want to speak to that?
I can tell you one way it is gambling.
Okay.
It's how many times do you look at your app per day? If you're that worried about it, then something's not being done correctly. That's not being a bad steward.
Unless your job is being a day trader.
Right, unless you're Dave.
Then you better...
Well, I don't day trade. It really depends on how long you have that money invested and what you're investing it for. And when you look at investing, what are you actually doing? You're giving money to companies, the top companies in the country. We're surrounded here by several Fortune 500 companies here in Lake County. Walgreens, one of the top pharmaceutical companies or pharmacy companies in the country. One of the top pharmaceutical companies, a couple of them actually, Abbott and AbbVie, Baxter, are all right here. These are companies that we know that Chase Bank is right down the road here. It's who we bank with. These are companies that you're investing in. And all you're doing, you're saying, yeah, this company I think is going to make a profit over time. Is it gambling? No, I don't. If you're looking at it as a long-term savings, then yes, I would say that it's safe. If you're doing day trading, as we joked about earlier, yeah, that's gambling.
Yeah. I think with the gambling thing, a lot of it's going to be a matter of the heart. Like, what are you doing? What are you attracted to about it? how you're going about it. I mean, just basic principles of investing, diversify, don't spend a ton of money investing into the stock market in one specific stock, because multiple companies will do better over time than one, okay? Also, look at those that have historically good performance. Don't invest in something that's just the newest thing. If you do, make it very small. What's that?
Cryptocurrency.
Oh, cryptocurrency. There you go. Also, look for low fees in the investments. And I only say this because I've had to do this with our own retirement account. I also manage my parents' retirement account, and have listened to our Schwab investor, tell us a lot of these things. But very helpful to think about. Also, if you are going to get, thinking about like day trading, be very careful. Go slow, go small. Do not put your family at risk at all. Take a disciplined approach, because you're going to learn a lot of lessons the hard way. And until you do, you want to learn those very small. But be very careful and check your heart. Here's another good question. How can you give generously? We talked about being generous givers and giving over and above the tithe in terms of giving offerings to various things. How could you give generously while paying what's left in your budget towards debt? So somebody has debt that whether it's college debt, whether it's credit card debt, whether it's a car debt, various debt. How would you still be a generous person, and how can you still be practically generous and yet at the same time have to deal with debt? How would you guys approach that?
I guess for us, what we did was we already had a few like charitable donations that were already in the budget that were we'd been doing them for years, so they were just kind of non-negotiable, like tithing. So when we made out the budget, those were already included. And then, because my income fluctuates, we were able to take some of it to put towards debt, and then also do some more generous stuff with that as well. And then with like raises, we were able to do more. We also ended up upping percentage on our tithing. We were challenged to do that by one of our old pastors, and it was amazing. And that's kind of how we approached it.
That's great. Anybody else? Rachel, what do you think?
I've learned a lot from my 4-year-old son. He has nothing, he has obviously no debt, but his heart of generosity when we have something delivered, his thought is always, how can I show love to this person? And so he draws lots of pictures for people, and it's intentionally because he wants to love. And so that concept of generosity is, what is my prayer life like in the morning before I start the day? Where is my heart? And is my focus on my to-do list, or how is it that I can show love to my family, to my community, to my church? Yeah. And there's so many different ways to show generosity versus just financially. But even there's an item that we had that I spent $5 on, but I didn't realize how much I clung to it until we had the opportunity to give it away. And the Lord is so kind and gentle in preparing my heart for this emotional situation. I had no idea it was going to happen, but just as an encouragement that as you're feeling led, that the Lord is preparing your heart in ways that you don't even realize.
Yeah, so many good lessons here, guys. Thank you. All right, here's another question, still moving on. What are the indicators that you are overworking or just trying to earn more for the future? What are the indicators that you are overworking or just trying to earn more for the future?
I think a couple of verses come to mind here. One is Proverbs 6 to 11. Consider the ant and how she works in the summer to gather her food for the winter, and then it goes on beyond that. That you sleep too much, you nap too much, and now you're going to go hungry. Through verses 9 through 11, you have 24 hours in a day, and we're also required to rest. So I think that you need to, again, we've mentioned it's in the heart, I think, is the biggest part. Are you trying, the only way you can get that pie bigger is actually to make it a little bit bigger through additional work. And if you're doing that for the right reasons, if you're doing it to get yourself out of debt, if you're doing it to help your family out a little bit more, then I think that your heart's in the right place. But make sure that you're doing what else is biblical, and that is taking that rest for yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anybody else?
I can just say one thing about this, just because I do have times, like for my work, where it's like ridiculously unbalanced. So I think if it's not something that happens often, then it's like might be acceptable. But I think the idea is, what is the pattern of your heart and what is your personality? If we're looking for indicators, I think the big one, the first one would be your family.
Yeah.
So what is your relationship with your family? What are they telling you? You know, so like we actually were just looking at something the other day where it was like, you know, the kids are telling their mom, like, we don't see you enough. Like, that's an indicator. You know?
Yeah.
And you know, she was traveling 75% of the time, which is crazy, right, for a mother with kids at home. So I think it's the idea of, like, what are your family telling you? And then also, what's your work telling you? Because sometimes work will be like, all right, you're our guy. You're always our guy. And it's like, you know what, this time I may have to take because of my family, I may have to take some time off to get things right at home. Because again, you know, if things are fine at work and things are horrible at home and you're okay with that, then that's not a good place to be, right? But like I said, I think family life and then obviously your work social situation, those are two things to really look at and say, okay, what are my patterns? What am I falling into? Now again, seasons in life, I'm just gonna say this because I do think there are times in life when you're like, okay, I'm behind at work, I gotta get up, and then you gotta put like, you know, 2 months of crazy hours in to get it back, but those 2 months need to stop. Or,
Yeah.
you know, to Dave's point, you will break down and then you'll start having health problems. So we've had like I remember there was one year in one of my companies I worked at, because I've been consulting for many years, and we had like 7 people have heart attacks. Like, that's a problem. Like, that's telling you you're working too much. You know?
Yeah. Watch your health. Yeah. As a pastor too, I would just even speak to this because I've seen this many times. So definitely ask your family and gauge the needs. Are their needs being met? Is your spouse's needs being met? Are your kids' needs being met? Because their needs are not just financial in nature, and they definitely have emotional needs, they have relational needs, they have physical needs. So gauge those and watch those from a holistic perspective. Also, as was mentioned, just watch your heart. If you're somebody who tends towards that, why? Sometimes that can flow from various things. Maybe you some people I've counseled through the past, like they work tirelessly because they are trying to make their parents proud of them, and that this inner sense of like, I need my parents' approval, rather than resting in the approval of the Lord, the approval before God that you are accepted, you are loved, and then working faithfully unto the Lord, which honors your parents at the same time. So just what's at the heart? What's at the root of that? But then at the other sense, I would say, if maybe you don't have kids at home, or maybe your kids are older, and maybe you've invested well, and yet you're somebody who has a gift of making money. And that's part of how God has gifted you and wired you. Some people, their spiritual gift is giving, and they do it very well and generously, and that's their spiritual gift. And they're like, man, God's given me a gift to make money, but then they use it for right purposes as well. And so that's not to be looked down upon. So working hard is definitely a valued thing, but just gauging those things. Am I meeting the responsibilities and the needs of the people in my life? Am I loving God, and am I loving others ultimately? So here's another question as well. Here we go. How do spouses of non-believers honor God when their partner doesn't want to do so? This is a really great question.
It is. I would say the same way that a Christian couple that might be unequally yoked. You have to. It's based on a mutual respect. The non-believing spouse needs to respect that other individual, the other half of that couple, and let them do what they feel led to do.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that?
I think as far as marriages go, right, this is a tougher one when the unbeliever's the husband.
Yeah.
Just as far as marriage roles. And I've seen it manifest itself in many ways, but I think the idea, definitely mutual respect if you can get it, but I think the question is, what if you can't get mutual respect, or the spouse is actively against Christianity? I think at that point, I think there's attendance, I think there's faithfulness towards God, and then as you can, you give and do things like that. And I think that's the part but your testimony in front of your unbelieving spouse is going to be basically the road to a better situation there, even with the antagonism.
Yeah.
So my other question would be, how much are you actually praying for the opportunity to tithe or to give generously in the way that God's called us to? And even though they're an unbeliever, God can change and soften their heart towards this topic as you continuously come before the Lord and request. God desires to honor that.
I think sometimes go ahead, Melissa.
Well, I would just say that as you're praying, if the financial situation and the spouse doesn't allow you to do that while you're praying, give in the ways that you can. Serve here at the church in any way that you can, whatever your gifts may be, until God answers the prayer.
Yeah. I think if you both work too, one of the things you can do is, tithe on what you make, definitely not force, respect the unbelieving spouse, but also invite them into the promise of God in that, because God says, that when you bring in the whole tithe, he will bring enough into your life. He will provide, and that's a great opportunity to put the Lord to the test in front of the unbelieving world in your home. And so I believe that many of the miracles that happen in life when we are sharing the gospel, because God is trying to confirm the word of the gospel in there. And so I think if you honor the Lord in those respects, in a respectful way, with what you are given, with what you're blessed with, allow the unbelieving spouse, they have a front row seat to watch the works of God in that way. And so maybe one of the ways they come to Christ is seeing God actually show up in a way he's promised to. So obviously not an easy one by any stretch. So thank you, team, for just speaking to these things. Here's another question. We have two more. How do you convince someone to accept the generosity of others? How do you convince someone to accept the generosity of others?
I feel like I'm answering every question and hogging the mic, but I'm in a study group right now with Compass Ministries, which I'll mention here later on. But we're doing a study on generosity, and this topic came up just a couple of weeks ago, and my point that I made for some folks is and as Mary Ann, my wife, likes to remind me, it's not all about me. We need to let others be blessed as well, and that's something that we all need to understand. That when Ken, I'm looking at you, and you might want to give something to me because you feel blessed by doing that, and so that's one of the things that I would say. We need to make sure that we're also thinking about the other individual and what they're going to receive out of this.
That's great.
Yeah, one thing I would just say about that is, because just kind of the context of the question is, in one sense, you can't force people, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's the idea that what I do I think very practically is just say, listen, this is from God, this isn't from me. And if you just kind of try to diffuse the pride aspect, because it's a pride aspect, right? Like, you're helping me, I'm not that pathetic, and it's like, okay, But if you're like, you know what, God gave this to me, and I'm just really giving it to you, and just try to, in one sense, inform that person and really kind of walk through it with them, that sometimes will bring down the defenses. I've had that work.
Sure.
I would say as a gift giver, because I really enjoy doing that, it's very difficult to have someone not want my gift. And but I try to respect that.
Yeah.
But it is, I would say that it is definitely a pride issue, and it is one of the lies that we're told of All I want to do is just give back what God's given me. And it's not anything, I'm not saying that, you're needy or whatever. That's not the case in any way. I was led. I heard God tell me, go do this.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, too, so pride can definitely be part of it. Other times it can be tied to emotional things that they don't even realize for them. Maybe there's a safety issue for them that they grew up learning that, man, I can't rely on anyone else. I need to rely on myself. Or somewhere along the line, they've thought, I don't want to be needy to anyone else. I don't want to burden anyone else in my life, and so I'll never receive that generosity. And so sometimes it's a pride issue, and sometimes it's really, it comes from other roots in their heart. And so maybe having a conversation with them and talking about those things, like, hey, what's behind that? Like there's some people who really want to give. Why do you feel like you don't want to? And sometimes I find that those who are most diligent, most hardworking, most responsible are sometimes the people who have a very difficult time asking for help. And it can be just a pride issue. Sometimes it's a connection issue with others. And so there's so much there that can go on. And don't worry, you don't have to psychoanalyze them or, kind of get to the root. But as Rachel has mentioned multiple times, man, just be praying for them, because there is something tied to that. And what I would say, too, is when we do open ourselves up to receiving the generosity of others, there is a heart that becomes compassionate and empathetic as well and becomes more generous. Because generosity is not just to be given one way. It's to go both ways and to be shared collectively and communally together. Thank you guys again for just all these things. Let's end with this question. Are there other resources to help me learn to handle finances from a Christian perspective? And where does the church stand with Dave Ramsey? So I'm guessing the Dave Ramsey question has to do with some of the recent stuff regarding their organization and that kind of stuff. What I would say with Dave Ramsey, just really quickly from a church perspective, we neither confirm nor deny anything that he does or doesn't do. With Christian principles, we would say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. God can still use imperfect vessels as he has to work his plans. And so take the good, leave the bad. And if it becomes an issue for you, you may have to just, rather than go from Financial Peace University with Dave Ramsey, go to a different one. But guys, what resources have you found, or what ones would you suggest that are helpful?
Well, we read Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover,
okay,
which is what how we kind of based loosely. We made it fit for us. We don't follow what he says religiously, but I loved his saying in now I can't remember it.
No, I get it. It happens.
Right?
It happens for me like every single week.
But
I'm like, that was a great point.
the more
that's never
generous
gonna
I
get
can
made.
be. I mean, basically the principle is, we would just listen to a story in Secret Church about a couple that decided to give 51% of their income.
Wow.
And live on the rest.
Wow.
And it's kind of the same kind of concept of the more you can give, because it's not mine. It's not mine to hold on to and hoard. It's all because of him, anything that I've been given. So my debt to income ratio needs to be low enough to be able to give in that way.
That's great. Anybody else?
I'm a big, I like Crown Financial, so that was a big part of me getting our life. I used to counsel for them. So I think that's a great resource. But again, I think these principles go across multiple organizations, so it's more about the principle than it is about where it came from. And then I think other than that, it's, sometimes, I know this might seem strange, but there are some older people out there that have been through these things that sometimes can really help you out. So it's not bad to maybe, ask your parents, ask your elders to kind of help you out there.
Yeah. Awesome. Any others? Rachel, Do you get?
I would turn first to the Bible. Proverbs is just filled with financial wisdom. Jesus spoke more about money than pretty much any other topic. So read the four Gospels and the different parables that he talks about, where he talks about money. Aside from that, this would be a self-serving plug. Kingdom Advisors, which is run by Ron Blue. Ron Blue is a Christian financial planner and as one of the pioneers in the business. He's written several books. Master Your Money is one that I think is really good. Larry Burkett, before he passed away, wrote a great book on budgeting. And I would also say, Dave Ramsey's done some good work as well. So there's Compass Ministries is another one. Howard Dayton has written several books on money management. So.
Yep. Excellent. Well, let me just say thank you. And can we just thank this panel for sharing their wisdom with us? All right, I'm going to close with prayer, and as I do, panel, you guys can go back to your seats. Father, thank you so much for these good principles that we've heard, these good tidbits of advice that you've given to us through these faithful servants of yours. Your word is filled with so many promises. Thank you that, Lord, we can trust you, that you are a good and benevolent God, a good Father who provides for the needs of his children. And when we trust you in these things, Lord, we know that you'll meet us. We know that you will respond as well, and you will bring what is good to bear on all of our life. And so, Father, we would just come to you. There's some things that we heard today that Lord has convicted our hearts, that have moved our hearts. Maybe we haven't prayed enough, or maybe we haven't just watched our finances enough, or maybe we need to lay down the credit card and use a little bit more cash system. Whatever that is, Lord, Spirit, may we be responsive to you today. Help us to remember that everything you call us to is for our good. It's for our joy in you. And I pray that we would trust in a good God today and look to you in these things. Father, money is a blessing from you. It's a gift from you, but it's only a tool, and it's only temporary. Lord, you are the greatest treasure, and may you always have first place in our hearts in all things. We ask this in your name and for our joy in you. Amen. Amen. Let's stand together, and let's close our time with a song of praise.